Hi, I'm Adam Levy, the Alcohol Professor. I'm here with George Sandeman. Say hi, George.
Hi.
There's George. We're saying hi. We're here to talk about this wonderful portfolio of ports. So can you tell us more about your portfolio?
Well, Adam, our portfolio is split into the two principal styles of ports.
Mm-hmm.
You have ruby ports,
Right.
and tawny ports, and it's important to understand that the ruby ports are very full-bodied, very fruit-driven, very flavorful, whereas the tawny ports have had wood aging, and so it's evolved. That fruit's evolved. They become much more complex. They become amber in color, tawny color, and that's where the name comes from. Much more aromatic. Vanilla flavors, a little bit coming from the oak nutty flavors, and so we essentially like to focus our portfolio on these two styles. In terms of our style of port, and of course everybody has their own style of port. Every winemaker believes their wine is the best wine. We believe that a balanced wine. Port has residual sweetness, so it's rich, balanced wine that leaves your mouth clean with good acidity is the style that we aim to have. And we have this word that we use, which is vibrancy. I'm not saying it exists, but it is the word that we apply. Our wines need to have vibrancy, and that really means that besides the balance, they have to clean your mouth, and when you say, I really like to taste that again, and you go back and taste it. And of course, the aromatics on these wines is also very, very enjoyable. So it's the style of wine we have.
So obviously in your portfolio and most port producers, you have a reserve type thing with no age per se, and then you have like a 20-year.
Exactly.
And I always found through my experience that the blend is always the hardest thing to make.
Oh, yes.
I mean, to match up every year or every year production that would taste it last year, I think the blending process is a harder process than actually saying this is our 20 year, this is our 10 year. When it happens in the whiskey side of the industry or rum, to make that every time you open that bottle the same thing every year, I think it's
the art.
It's a genetic trait I did not get. So it's just one of those things I did not get in life, and I get to enjoy it, but I don't have that natural abilities, and that's a natural ability.
It is, and I think sometimes in port it's underestimated because people tend to think of port, particularly those that know a little bit about port, they tend to think of the great vintage ports, which are wines of the single year. And those wines are great because they've been selected to be the top wines of that year. But you can't put aside the art that goes into making, whether it's a reserve port or even the young 3-year-old wines, which have to be very consistent in their style. And blending, for many years in port business, in the cellars, we didn't have winemakers. We had blenders. They were called the tasting room head was a blender, and he watched the barrels maturing. With tasting, they taste literally hundreds of samples of wines coming from hundreds of barrels a day. Just nosing, not in the mouth, just on the nose, see how the wine was evolving, and then start determining which wines were going to be used for a blend that possibly, and in the case of Founders Reserve, 5 years later would then be selected, and as you say, would have to be matched to the wine that was made the year before or 6 months before, so that the blend would be consistent. And that consistency is the third of the traits that we believe strongly in. So it's a question of balance, vibrancy, and consistency. And the good news, anybody that likes Sandeman port is always going to like it, because it's going to be consistent. And anybody that doesn't, well, I'm afraid they're never going to see the great pleasure in life, but that's life.
I believe in bias. I'm all for that. So we start with the Founders Reserve.
So we start Founders Reserve as I say, is a young 5-year-old-ish. I say ish because it's a blend, and so it's difficult to put an age on these wines. But it's a very full-bodied wine, has some evolution to it. So it's not big and young and fruity. It's a little bit complex. It's a little bit aged, and then bottled. And we believe that the wines, when they're bottled, are in their optimum stage for drinking. So in these wines, these are not wines that you would want to go and age for any longer. They stand up very well for 12 months, 24 months, not a problem. And even if you leave them longer, it just evolves, it becomes a different wine, but this is the optimum age. This is very good to drink on its own. If you want just a glass of reserve port, Founders Reserve port, when the winter comes and you get home and you feel like eating something, a snack, late at night in a glass of Founders Reserve instead of a glass of wine.
Yes.
You know, it's a very nice alternative. But it's also lovely in the summertime with a bit of ice. You know, that makes very well. Then you move to the other wines here that we have, which are the tawny ports. And here, these are also blends, okay, but they're blended from smaller lots of wines that have been aging. And we actually start off with a 10-year-old, a 20-year-old, which we have here, the 30, and then the 40, very small amounts of the 40. And the complexity here develops with the age of the wine. My favorite, I have to tell you, is the 20-year-old. I think it's the perfect balance in between what is the young wines, the big robust wines, and then as they develop in wood, the older wines. And that I think is we believe, and many even my competitors believe, that this is a benchmark of 20-year-old tawny port. And we've been very lucky at Sandeman that many years ago, 100 years ago, that they laid down stocks of wines that permit us to make these great tawnies.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
Has the sugar content changed in any way over the years?
It may increase slightly in the case of the older tawnies, because obviously you have evaporation as there is more concentration, but it's about 115 grams more or less of sugar in these wines. What happens is, it seems, because of the change in the style, it seems to be more viscous. It seems to have a high amount of sugar, but it really doesn't change that significantly.
And let's say on the path of the 20-year, how many barrels do you think will go through?
How many barrels will this go through?
Yeah.
Oh my God, I've never been asked that question.
Yay.
I have to tell you something. I can't answer that.
That's fine.
You got me there.
That's fine.
I have to go back and ask one of the accountants.
And this is not a gotcha. This is not a gotcha moment. This is just
fascinating. Fascinating question.
Those who watch our videos know that I'm a very big fan of casks. I like to ask a lot of cask questions. You know, where the cask is from, where's the oak from, do you char it, do you re-char it, do you have your own cooperage? I mean, these are the questions I like to ask. So,
well, some of those I can answer.
Please
but I must admit, that's left me fascinated in terms of how many barrels it goes through, and we'll come back. In port making, we refer to the barrels we use as pipes.
Okay.
Coming from the peepers, and these are oak normally, and white oak. For many years it was referred to as American white oak,
yes.
but a lot of it actually came from Central Europe. In port making, we don't value new oak.
Okay.
So we use most of the oak barrels for aging other wines, and then use them for port.
Okay.
So a barrel to get to be aged, used for a 20-year-old tawny, would probably be aged with the barrel would be aged with red wine.
Yes.
Then with ruby port, young ruby port. Entry-level quality, and then working its way up, and eventually, when it had been really seasoned and matured, it would be used for 20-year-old of the aging tawnies. And these barrels, I'd say, probably a life cycle of 50, 60 years with very little difficulty.
That's impressive.
Yeah, the coopers, we used to have teams of coopers, but it became more effective to essentially have coopers working in the warehouse. But every now and then we have to call together 3 or 4 coopers. They break down a cask and rebuild it, and make new staves and put it back together again, and that keeps us in barrels.
Great, really appreciate that information. And again, if you are in Portugal in September, October during harvest time like it is now here in New York, please visit and visit their cellars. It's got great reviews online. TripAdvisor and other places have given great reviews visiting the location, and we encourage you to follow the vine, follow the still, follow the brewery. Thank you.
Thank you.